Thank you guys for being here. We appreciate you guys. Usually during these workshops, I'm not up here as one of the speakers. Usually we have other people that are like experts. And so you guys get Shannon, who's an expert, and me, who's like second string. So that's what this is. But today we're talking a little bit about art. I'm going to be honest with them. When we planned this, we talked about this, we kind of decided this was going to be a little bit more conversational.
Yeah.
And it was going to be something that, at least for the parts when we're both up here, is going to be a little bit less formal. So,
Yeah.
But Shannon, do you want to share a little bit about who you are and then also like why you might be here talking about art?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know about the expert comment, but we'll start with, so I am Shannon McKee. I work here at the church in our care department. I'm our care director, and then which is a new department. So if you're wondering what's that mean, that's a great question. I don't fully know yet. I'm figuring it out as I go. But and then I've been our women's ministry director for a little while. So right now I'm straddling those two roles, and been married to Rick for 32 years, and we have two kids that are right around your guys' age. So
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what's art do for you? Why is it something that's part of your life?
I think I'm not, I didn't go to school with an art degree or whatever, but probably my passion and desire to better wrap my head around what art is and how it blesses us has just developed over time as I've walked with God and seen how He interacts in the world. And so His creation, ways that art speaks to me, the primary way for me is through literature. I'll just be honest, that's where I encounter the Lord the most, is through story. But yeah, so it's mostly just personal kind of passion of mine.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And that's great. And one of the reasons that I asked you if you could do this is because I think throughout the years that I've been here, I think we think through things and approach this area similarly, and but in different mediums kind of thing.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was looking to go into college, I wanted to go to college to make movies. So I applied to like Full Sail University, and there were a couple other places out in California. And I felt the Lord kind of tugging on my heart that I should be doing ministry. And so I went and pursued a degree in youth ministry, but my passion for movies never really went away. I still love film, and it's a big part of my life and how I have learned to worship God through it. So I'm excited to have this like kind of conversation and be able to have this time together. So
yeah, it'll be fun.
Cool. Yeah. Well, who in here does not care about art, just by show of hands? And be honest, it's okay. I want you to be honest. So yeah, that's good. I'm glad. Aaron, raise your hand. You said you didn't care about art. Basketball is art, Josh.
Right. Colin's dad is an artist, but he's like, Colton. Colin is the older brother. Sorry. I had a brain fart, but yeah.
Ray family, so.
Right. Wrong brother.
Right. Well, the art is something that I think that we encounter every day, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to negate that, but I want to talk about and define what is art. I want to actually make sure we have like an establishment of what this means and the fact that we can actually like understand what it is. And I don't want to say like, the art is for just the people that like paintings and like going to art museum.
Right.
But I think that we see art and interact with art every day. And it looks like different things and it's in different mediums, but I think it's a big part of our life. And especially as Americans, I think it looks one way, but all around the world, people interact with art in different ways. So we were trying to figure out a definition of what art is.
Right. It was hard. We were like, okay, how, and even some of the books that we read, they really wrestled with like, okay, how do you define it? Because some people define it really narrow. And then some people are like, no, it's a lot broader than that. And I'll be honest, when I came into the conversation, part of my thinking was art means beauty. Like it has to be something beautiful. But we were kind of challenged to go beyond even that definition.
Yeah, I agree. And it was good. There were good points that kind of popped up. And so when we kind of got to the point of understanding that art is hard to define, Shannon actually came up with some really good kind of like points to like think about art. If you wanted to share some of those, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. So there were 4 things that kind of came to mind. One is that it's creative. So it's not just, it's different than a math problem where you're just stating facts. So there has to be some element of imagination or craftsmanship to it. The other thing was that it communicates something, that there's should be some sort of response or feeling that it brings forth in us. And that's where the beauty piece got challenged a little bit, because it's not always that it brings forth beauty, but it should elicit some kind of response, awaken something in you. One guy said that we know through art that it is felt in our bones, nerves, and muscles, as well as grasped by our minds, which I thought was an interesting quote.
That was good.
The third thing that we talked about was that it's subjective, that it's not 2 + 2 = 4. So different people can look at different paintings or films or books and come out with slightly different thoughts or emotions that brings out in them. Usually the author had a specific intent, what he or she wanted, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always received that way. And we even read about some kind of controversial pieces that we were like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
There was one, just to give it, we talked about this last time we met. We were reading a book, and I had brought the book with me, so I'll share about it later, but about an art piece of like a crucifix that had Jesus in a jar, I think it was, of pee.
Yeah, urine.
Of urine. And he talks about this story of like, there was one person that saw it and was repulsed and offended by it and thought it was terrible, and then they got swung all the way to the other perspective of somebody that like, an example of somebody that could come to faith because they see it, watching like Jesus bear the sins that they have, the disgusting sins that we have, so that we could be like viewed as pure. Like, it's just so subjective and different, and I think that is very interesting, like, approach to have to it. So,
Yeah. And even with that one, the creator of that piece had an intent, but people received it differently.
Yeah.
And then the fourth thing that we thought of was that it's transcendent, that it's kind of fundamental to the human experience across all cultures. So different cultures might have different ways of expressing art or doing art, but the desire to create and express ourselves that way is transcendent across cultures.
I agree. Yep. And I think that there's a little bit more to why that is, but we'll touch on that in a minute, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good kind of like place to think about art. We haven't really given a firm definition, but I think it's like a good like baseline to keep us as we consider other things.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I want to talk about though is, why is art valuable? Why is it valuable to have even art? Because I think there's some people that would consider it and think like, oh, like this is something that I couldn't live without it, you know? And there's other people that are saying, I could live without it, kind of thing, you know?
Right.
It's just not the way that they necessarily naturally operate. I think there's a few reasons why it's valuable. And for me, at least the first one, is that it challenges us. It challenges us to consider things in our lives, things around us, the way that we look at the world, the way that we interact with people, and even what the original intent may be and what you might understand from that piece of art, how you can actually grasp it and how you can challenge yourself to understand and cooperate with those different things that you're experiencing in life. And sometimes it might be something that's purely emotional, and sometimes it might be something that's very practical in your life.
Yeah.
I think also that art can be beautiful. I think art can be something that is really good for us, and it's really appealing to the eyes, you know. But I think also that it's beautiful, but it's sometimes like out of like a disgust or a sadness, which is kind of hard to talk about.
Yeah.
But it's still appealing to the eye. It's still something that we desire to see. It's doing something within us. And it's causing us to think and consider things that maybe we wouldn't consider and think about as we go throughout our lives, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to think like art is only the things that are like the nice things, or the easy things to look at, but it can the things that are challenging for us as well. So,
Yeah. I think it can also, another value of it is it can draw us together. So, and we talked a little bit about even if it draws us together to debate, it can be something that draws us together. It doesn't matter how educated you are. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. It doesn't, like, it kind of crosses barriers and can be a conversation piece that can be talked about. When a good movie comes out, lots of people across the culture can talk about it.
Yeah.
And so it can kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think like superhero movies and Marvel has done a lot of things for movies. Some of them good, some of them not great. But I think one of the unifying things is that point exactly. That it like brings people together to talk about something, to be engaging with something together. I think it's just a great point. And I want to make sure like how far that appreciation goes though for certain pieces of art. It might look different for different people in the room. You don't have to be like this super like in-depth person to appreciate art, but like you can look at something and say, that's beautiful. Or that makes me feel something without even having to say like maybe what it makes you feel, you know? You don't even have to clarify it, but you can at least look at it and say, that's a good piece of art. That's a good song. That's that was a really moving book kind of thing, you know?
Yeah.
I think that could be true of a lot of things, so.
Yeah.
This next point, though, I want to let you just run with kind of thing.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
So another reason art can be valuable is that it's actually really good for our brains. You wouldn't think about that because you wouldn't guess that it matters. A lot of times I think people think that art is like icing on the cake, but it's actually not just icing on the cake. It's really great for our brains. So the process of creating actually promotes brain plasticity. Like it helps our brains form, it helps the connections in our brains form, and a lot of this I learned as I delved into the counseling world and started to realize how important it is for our right and our left brain to start to communicate. And so when we engage in creative activities, our brains actually enter a unique state. And so when we let our minds wander, there are things that start to happen in our brains that help us grow and be healthier. And so there's a kind of a misconception in our world sometimes that, well, I'm left brain or I'm right brain. But God made all of us so that both of those are constantly supposed to be in communication. No one of us is actually all left brain or all right brain. And so, like if I think we have a slide of the brain, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah, so left brain, right brain, who knows which side is which? You know, you can tell from the picture. But so the left brain is, I always remember it because the left brain is logic. And so you think left, right, that the two L's go together. And so the left brain is the part of the brain that is logical, orderly, rational, objective. That's the part of your brain that you use for learning a new language. It makes sense of situations. You determine right and wrong. All that's happening in your left brain, okay? Your right brain is your emotion mind. That's the part of you that processes experiences. It's holistic and subjective. It can interpret that's the part of your brain that interprets nonverbals from people. And then it's also the part of your brain that dreams, creates, or imagines. And it's also the relational part of your brain. It's the part of your brain that the five senses kind of activate with. And so there are actually some benefits of your right and your left brain being in good communications. Stress reduction is one of them. Self-awareness and social skills are all things that are, as we grow our right and our left brain, we can see both. And there's actually a lot of science being done now that sometimes when they can affect the heart rate, people can heal faster from participating in artistic activities. So it's kind of crazy how important it actually is, that if you only develop your left brain, the logic part of you, and I think honestly that's part of one of the things the church has had to learn, like when we just sit and listen to a sermon only, that didactic teaching, we don't grow as much as when we participate in worship and that's why we do the art projects out in the atrium on Sunday mornings and things like that. So
yeah, that's fantastic. And even when I think about it too with that, and we'll get a little bit more into it in a second here, but I'm grateful to have pastors that are creative themselves kind of thing. Like, they might not say it, but the fact that they're willing to bring illustrations and pictures and even like video clips into sermons and things like that, because I think that does something for us. If I just sat there and listened to like somebody read from scripture and then explain to me what they just read and be like, all right, now we're going to pray, like, God would probably use that.
I'm sure he would.
But I would, in that moment, as a human, I probably would sit there and think, that was not the most exciting thing in the world that I've sat through, you know?
Right.
And I have sat in services like that before, and they're not the most exciting. And so I think there's an appreciation that we're starting to kind of like recognize the need and the helpfulness that is just for the human mind kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So we've talked a little bit about why art has value in of itself, but why is art valuable to the Christian? I think that's an important question. Specifically, some of the point that you just hit on, and when I come to talk a little bit about movies, I want to address a little bit about that elephant in the room that comes with that. But I think talking about why art is valuable with Christians is important. I think something that I found beautiful in one of the books that we're reading is that God invites us into creativity. That God didn't just name animals on the own when he was in the garden, but he said, go and here, let's go name this animal together. Let's go name this one. And to be able to go and do those things. Or I know you're going to talk about it a little bit later, but thinking about the tabernacle and the temple, like God didn't just like build it or say like, here's like your blueprint kind of thing, which he does. But he says, here's how to adorn it and make it beautiful and make it represent him. And people get to participate in that. Like, they're not just these, it's not God just doing these things off to the side. He's using his people to actually make things beautiful, to look beautiful. I think there's something amazing about that. And I also think that an aspect of it is that it's worshipful, that it is a way that we can create beauty. There was a quote that I pulled from one of the books. It says, God is already the origin and source of all beauty, yet somehow we can beautify him with words, lyrics, songs, with art. The fact that we can create, that we can do these things, develop these things, is a sign of a creator, that we are created by a creator, and that we get to reflect him in that and point back to him and show him how great he is. And that if we just throw those things to the side, I think we forget the beauty of what he initially did for us, and what he has given us and the way that he looks at us and views us, and that we can make these things and say, I'm looking at you and seeing beauty as well. That it's worship and it's pointing back to him constantly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think it is worshipful, and it allows us actually to get a little peek into the heart of who God is and what he's like. He tells us that in the Bible. We have examples of him creating, of course, in the Bible. In Psalm 19, he tells us that one of the ways he speaks to us is through his creation, that he shouts at us, telling us a little bit of what he's like by the world that he's created. But in Romans 1:20, it says that for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. And so he is creative, and so we get a peek into his heart when we create as well. A way that I feel like expresses this way better than I could is a quote from a guy named Dallas Willard that I feel like is, he does a great job of capturing it, to the point that sometimes when I read this quote, I get choked up, which isn't always a surprise to people. But anyway, let me read it to you because I think it just does such a good job of kind of giving a vision for how it gives us a peek into his heart. So he says, while I was teaching in South Africa some time ago, a young man took me out to see the beaches near his home in Port Elizabeth. I was totally unprepared for the experience. I had seen beaches, or so I thought, but when we came over the rise where the sea and the land opened up to us, I stood in stunned silence, then slowly walked toward the waves. Words cannot capture the view that confronted me. I saw space and light and texture and color and power that seemed hardly of this earth. And this is the place where we see God's heart. Gradually, there crept into my mind the realization that God sees this all the time. He sees it, experiences it, knows it from every possible point of view. This and billions of other scenes like it and unlike it in this and billions of other worlds. Great tidal waves of joy must constantly wash through his being. It is perhaps strange to say it, but suddenly I was extremely happy for God and thought I had some sense of what an infinitely joyous consciousness he is and what it might have meant for him to look at his creation and find it very good. We pay a lot of money to get a tank with a few tropical fish in it and never tire of looking at their brilliant iridescence and marvelous forms and movements. But God has seas full of them, which he constantly enjoys. I just think that's a great glimpse reminds me of what his life is like. And there are parts of the creation that we are just now discovering that he has been enjoying at the bottom of seas and out in space. We're finally just noticing that they're there, but he's been enjoying those things for thousands of years.
Yeah.
That he created them just for himself.
Yeah.
And so
It's amazing. That is a fantastic quote. I read that earlier today when I was putting these slides together, and it is beautiful. It's a beautiful picture of what God experiences. I think.
yeah.
And as I think about this and think about more God as an artist, like the Bible in itself is art. I mean, you're going to talk in a minute here about literature and the value that it has, so I don't want to steal too much thunder kind of thing. But much of the Bible is narrative and poetic, and there's ways that when you read it, if you take it literally, you might be taking it the wrong way, you know? Like, there's a way sometimes God uses metaphor to help us understand. I mean, Jesus spoke in parables all the time to help people understand things. It wouldn't just be like these, very boring kind of lessons, but instead he puts stories together to paint a picture of what it looks like to worship and love God. And I think that's an amazing picture of who God is and how he looks at us. And I think God expresses art in both goodness and sadness too when it comes to scripture. A lot of pictures of what it looks like to be with him for eternity, for us to even just express a love to him, as well as hard moments in scripture and sad moments, and maybe somebody used the word defeating. It just feels hard, especially when it talks about Christ's death and how the disciples looked and saw, is this actually our Messiah kind of thing? And then to reflect it again with this beautiful picture of his resurrection. And I always think of the funny story in 2 Kings. There's a story about some bears that come out of the woods and that maul a bunch of kids for calling a guy bald or calling him old kind of thing. There's some wild stuff that happens in the Bible, for God to illustrate these pictures and narratives of what he needs to get across to his people. And granted, I fully believe that's a true story. So, and so there's different things that pop up, and I think it was one of those things that I don't think God has ever limited himself just to be this very inoffensive, very person that's put into a box. You know? But he knows who he is and what truth is.
Yeah. He shouts it to us in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
And I think it creates a longing in us to desire art, to learn more about art kind of thing. So for sake of time, I want to pass this off to you now.
Okay.
I'm going to let Shannon kind of take the wing for a little bit here and talk a little bit about literature and kind of the things, and even talk a little bit about fine art kind of thing. So I'll pass this off to you. I'm going to get off stage.
Okay.
And,
you got to tell me how to do this.
This bottom one is the one that it doesn't make sense, you know.
Yeah.
But art's subjective, so we'll try this.
Right. All right, I'll do my best. Okay. So kind of where I want to go, and I'm just going to take a little bit of time here, and then we're going to let Alex do some stuff with film. But kind of where I want to go is to talk a little bit about a little bit more about that idea of longing that art should create in us. One of the ways the Lord has grown me over time is that I've learned to be a noticer, I call it, of the world around me. So that's both in the creative world, it's in art, it's in all kinds of ways, to be a person who pauses to notice what it is that I'm consuming. And so if we really believe that art is a gift from God, we've talked about why it's valuable to the Christian, and that it communicates important things to us, then we want to pay attention to the feelings that it evokes. We want to notice, okay, why did I react that way to that poem or to that story or to that painting, whatever it is. And so Alex is going to do more with film, but what I want to talk about is a little bit of what the difference is between art and entertainment, because I think that's an important distinction when we think about story. And since we're going to talk a little bit about story, I think there's a famous artist, his name is Makoto Fujimura, and he says, entertainment gives you a predictable pleasure, but art leads to transformation. And so I think there's a little bit of overlap between art and entertainment. I don't think it's just all one or the other, and I don't think one is necessarily bad. I don't think entertainment is necessarily bad and art isn't necessarily good. I think there's overlap there. But I think one of the differences is that entertainment is something that we consume. And right now in our culture, we do that a lot through short bits. And so we're consuming things all the time as a culture because information is constantly coming to us, right? And so the thing with entertainment is it doesn't necessarily surprise us. It meets our expectations. It almost coddles us because usually when we choose just strictly entertainment, what we're looking for is to numb out a little bit, right? If we're honest. Like sometimes, and there's a place for that at times. Sometimes I just want to watch something funny for half an hour. Like that's it. That's what I need at the end of my day. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think the difference is that art is something that we want to savor, that we want to hang on to, almost like a hard piece of candy versus something that you chew up quickly. A hard piece of candy you hold in your mouth for a while because you're savoring it, you're thinking about it. Sometimes art wounds us. It breaks our hearts. It causes us to cry. It reveals our own inadequacies. Sometimes it forces us to make a choice. That's how it can be different sometimes than entertainment that just pacifies us and that we just take in, okay? And so what I want you to do is I want you to take a few minutes at your tables and talk a little bit about the last time you can remember some kind of art, any kind of art. It can be God's art in creation, it can be a painting, sculpture, movie, story, some kind of art that you responded to with emotion of some kind. So I want you to think about what the artistic thing is, and then I want you to think about the emotions that it evoked in you, and I want you to share that with each other, okay? So take a few minutes to do that now. Does anybody feel brave enough to share with the whole group what their thing was? Maybe like two of you could share. We shared with each other. There were 2 movies and a book that we talked about. All right, Katie. Okay. What was the emotion that it evoked for you?
I feel like just like awe. I've never literally never lived in the country, so it was like very just like like no words kind of feeling.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Feel good, Ethan?
We had the eclipse and the Olympics.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Yeah, the eclipse was pretty powerful. All right, Colton.
My drawing that I made like
Okay. What was the emotion that it evoked for you?
it's yeah, I'm not saying.
Right. All right. Right. All right. Well, yeah, I don't know what kinds of art some of you enjoy, what kinds of things you enjoy, but I wanted to share with you a definition that one of my heroes, C.S. Lewis, came up with when he talks a lot in some of his books about longing and about art and how it brings that out. And he uses a German word, and I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I think it's Sehnsucht or Sehnsucht. I can't remember. I listened to it and tried to remember how to say it, but obviously I didn't take German. But it's a German word that's translated as longing or yearning for something inexpressible. It can be a powerful experience, a fundamental truth about God, kind of the idea in Ecclesiastes 3:11 where God says, He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. So it's a longing for an object, it's a longing for something bigger than this world. Lewis calls it like an old ache. He also calls it the desire for a far-off country. he says that this desire betrays our most intimate. He even says that when he's writing about it, he feels a certain shyness, almost like I'm committing an indecency, trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia or romanticism or adolescence. And he says we can't tell this secret because it is the desire for something beyond our experience. So it's inarticulable. We feel it when we hear certain snatches of music. We catch a sideways glimpse of something beautiful. But this beauty, this glory, this is Lewis speaking again. He says, this beauty, this glory that we long for is not in the thing, but we feel it through the thing. And what comes through is longing. These things are not the thing itself. They are only an echo of a tune we have not yet heard, news from a country we have not yet visited. I love that imagery. He's painting a picture of these beautiful things that we see in art or in creation that create in us a longing for something that we can't even quite explain what that longing is yet, because it's a place we haven't visited. And so in Lewis's mind, that's a longing ultimately for heaven, for eternity with God, that there's something there. And so we could spend a whole semester, we could do an art class talking about all the different ways that different pieces move us. You might think about the last time a song was able to make you weep before it even finished. And I don't even just mean worship songs. I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice when we do a sacred secular split and it's like only these kind of songs. But the last time a song moved you to some sort of reaction. And so one of the ways that the Lord, we've already talked about the fact that he communicates a little bit of what he is like through his creation in Psalm 19. Psalm 19 then goes on to talk about the fact that not only has he told us what he's like in his creation, but he's given us words. He's described things for us so that we can know him through those words. Obviously, his word, the Bible, is the main place where we get that. But I think also he has given us story. He has given us the ability to create story that has echoes of the gospel in it. I think sometimes in movies and in stories that there are the people who are writing these books are communicating echoes of the gospel, but they don't even know Jesus. They don't know that they're communicating the gospel through the book that they're writing, but they are. And so one of the things that struck me was as an example of how God could choose to give a very simple sentence about himself to us, and he chooses instead to use poetic language. So let me read for you the first verse of Psalm 45, and I'm going to read it in 3 different versions because I want you to catch. God could have said, the author who's writing this psalm about God could have said, God loves me very much. He could have just said a direct sentence like that. But instead he says, in the ESV version, he says, my heart overflows with a pleasing theme. I address my verses to the king. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. So this is the psalmist responding to God saying, I'm gonna say that God loves me like this. If you read it in a prayer book that I enjoy called Sheltering Mercy, he phrases it this way. He says, my heart bursts its banks, spilling beauty and goodness. I pour it out in a poem to the king, shaping the river into words. So you feel the difference between just saying, I'm declaring my love to God versus my heart is bursting with delight. And then if you read it in the Message, which is not a translation but a paraphrase, it says, love is a song in my heart, a song you first sang to me, a swelling, soaring symphony of sound, a river swollen by winter, released in spring, a cup running over an uncontainable flood. See how that is so much more descriptive than just saying, I want to tell God that I love him? Can you feel the difference between those two approaches? And I think we can see that. In this case, it's in the scripture, it's a psalm. But I think sometimes human poets and human authors do the same thing for us. They bring to life things that we know are spiritual principles and truths, but we don't know how to describe the thing that we're feeling. And so you have a poem. Let me start with one of my favorite sentences in all of literature, and read for you from the Dawn Treader, the first line. He starts it by just saying, there was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. I think that's a great first line of a book, because right away, Lewis hasn't even gone anywhere yet into the story, but he's already told us that Eustace is kind of a little whiny pain in the butt, and that he kind of deserved the name Eustace Clarence Scrubb before he's even gone any further than that. And then he goes on to draw this picture of an opportunity to go back into Narnia. And how do they get back into Narnia this time? Through a painting on the wall of a famous ship that Prince Caspian is the captain of. And so there's this beautiful thing that happens where Lewis is constantly encouraging us to be transported to another place that we long for. And he does that by creating verse for us. Now, Lewis happens to be a believer, but there are other poets and storytellers that are not Christians that have written things for us that echo these same kind of desires. You could go through the whole of cinematic history, and Alex is going to do that a little bit, but there are going to be things that pop out at us that remind us of who Jesus is, different figures. The author of Harry Potter, there are Christ figures in those books that point us to who Jesus is and what Jesus is like, even though she's not trying to teach us the gospel. I don't know where she stands in her faith experience, but she's writing a story that we can identify with and see. I think there are other, there's other poets that give us glimpses into that same thing. But the next thing I want to do, instead of drilling down too long on the poetry side of things, I want to take you to a couple of paintings and sculptures. Well, we're not going to do paintings. We're just going to do a couple sculptures that also kind of give us that feeling of a different kind of moment. And so let me take you to this one that is called the Pieta. Is it there? Yeah. It's called the Pieta. It's a famous sculpture by Michelangelo. And he did this sculpture. It's interesting because this is one of those times where straight up truth, and this is supposed to be Mary with Jesus after he was crucified. There's nothing in the scripture that says that Mary held Jesus after he was crucified. And so right away, if you're stronger in the logic brain and you don't allow yourself to engage your right brain at all, right away you're critical of this because you're like, well, we don't even know if that's in the scriptures. We don't know that ever happened. But Michelangelo wasn't necessarily trying to repeat the exact words of the scriptures as much as he was trying to evoke emotion for us. And so he was trying to help us catch that there's this moment where Mary was a real human person who watched her son get crucified on the cross. And so Michelangelo is trying to evoke emotion for us by this sculpture that we can catch a glimpse of what that moment might have been like when Mary dealt with her emotion about her son being crucified. And it reminds us of the cost of the gospel. And so sculptures and paintings and stories are not always a literal truth statement. Sometimes they're intended to just evoke emotion in us and to create a response. I think the Lord even did this when he gave instructions about creating the temple. And Alex talked about that a little bit a minute ago. But I want to read to you something that stuck out to me from Exodus 31. The first time in all of the scriptures that someone is said to have been filled with the Spirit is not one of the prophets, not one of the teachers. It's one of the artists that God calls to build the temple, which I thought was really profound. Like, not that other people weren't filled with the Spirit before him, but this is the first time Scripture tells us that someone was. And so it says, the Lord said to Moses, "See, I have called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with the ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold, silver, and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, and in carving wood, to work in every craft. And behold, I have appointed him, the son of," I can't say some of these names, "of the tribe of Dan, and I have given to all able men ability that they may make all the things I have commanded you. The tent of meeting, the ark of the testimony, the mercy seat that is on it, all the furnishings in the tent, the table, its utensils," and he goes on and on to list. And so the first time he's telling us that someone has been filled with the Spirit for a purpose is because he's asking them to create something beautiful in a place of worship for him. And so right out of the gates, God is saying, this is important to me. These things that I'm making reflect me, and they tell part of the story. And so if you look at what the temple looked like inside, this is an artist's rendering of what it probably looked like, there's a lot of extra there, right? It's not just stripped down utilitarian. You've got these beautiful images that are probably meant to reflect what the Garden of Eden was like on the walls. God used gold and the finest things, and he called the best craftsmen to do it. And sometimes he told the stories creatively through pictures on the walls. And so there's a lot of emphasis even in the scriptures for why that's important. And so what I want you to catch when you're reading a book or when you're standing in front of a poem or a painting, when you're looking at any one of those kinds of things, when you're listening to a piece of music, I want you to start to pay attention to those things and not just consume them blindly, but to pay attention to what are the feelings that this is evoking in me. When I read a piece of fiction, a good book, it should stir something in me. And if it doesn't, it might not be worth my time. It reminds me that some foods are good for us and some foods are bad. And we almost have to retrain ourselves at times to want the good food, you know? So when you feel terrible after you eat at McDonald's and you feel good after you've had some sushi or something like that, you might, for your own health's sake, might want to start to say, maybe I'll choose this sushi next time. And art is the same way. You need to seek out what edifies, what enlightens, what strengthens you, and have discernment for it. Discernment means reading the ingredients on the back of the box and saying, what exactly is high fructose corn syrup? And in the same way with our movies and the different things we're taking in, to be able to look at that and say, is this book worthy of my time? There was a book series that came out recently that I enjoyed the idea of it. It's a newer series about dragons, and I love dragons. I enjoyed the idea of it, but I was kind of like, this writing just isn't that great, and a lot of it ends up being about sex. And so, not that I have to avoid everything about sex, but I just realized after the first book, I'm like, it's just not really that well written. It's not that great of a book for me to spend my time on. And it doesn't evoke in me the things that I want to be fanning the flames on in my life. And so there are things like that that I think are important to us. And to remember that it's not the thing itself that creates the longing, but it's the longing that we want to move towards, because otherwise the thing itself could become an idol. The book could become an idol, the movie, the painting. It's not about being a connoisseur of good paintings. It's about what is the longing that it creates in me and how is that good. And so Lewis, this is a famous kind of quote of his. He says, "Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists somewhere. A baby feels hungry, well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel desire, well, there is such a thing as sex. And if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." And I think that that is what good story, good poetry, good paintings should do in you, is create that desire and build that longing for the other world that God has created us for. And so that's kind of where I'll leave us. And I would just encourage you to pay attention to those longings when they come. But I'm going to turn it over to Alex and let him talk about film.
Thank you, Shannon. If you guys are really interested in some of that art, the fine arts and things like that, I actually just read a book. The title is it's supposed to be like funny, ironic. It's called Beard Theology, and largely it tracks how we got the paintings and imagery of Jesus and what that actually means for that. So if you're curious and interested in more of those things, I have it in my car. I can pull it out if you want to see it. But without further ado, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about movies and TV. So I think this is probably an area where most, if not all of us, consume this to some extent. That movies and TV are part of kind of what we do daily or weekly. And when I talk about this, my area that I know better is about film, but many of the qualities, if not all of them, that I'll talk about pertain to movies and TV. So if I address one or the other, I'm usually talking about both. But my biggest takeaway for my little bit of time that I have is that I want to make sure that we watch movies and TV with a biblical filter. That we don't let movies influence us, but we let movies help us to learn. And that's my biggest thing I want you guys to see from this. And I think that kind of with the landscape of Christianity and church and the way that it functions right now, at least in the United States, is that there's very much so a pushback against movies and TV, and there's this like fear of it. And to be able to understand where we are right now, we have to talk about where we've been. And so I want to talk a little bit about, just real quick, about the history of Christians and film and figure out a little bit how we got to the point that we're at. And the biggest idea that I've seen throughout this whole through line is that Christians devalue art when they divide art into secular art and Christian art. That there has, for some reason, we've created these two different categories that you're either secular art, art of the world, like this thing that's really bad for you, you shouldn't take in, and then there's Christian art. It's the good, clean, safe stuff that talks about Jesus, and that is kind of like a little bit more surface level so that it doesn't threaten too much. And I think that there's a reason this has changed. So right now, movies are about 100 years old. Movies are a relatively new type of art form. They're not like something that has been around for generations. It's something that was kind of learned. There's been some film studios recently that are celebrating their 100-year anniversaries. And so things like that are popping up, and movies have been made for a while. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of the best movies ever made, and it's like on like 60 years old or something like that now. Tim, one of your leaders, he's a big fan of it. If you ever want to get him on a tangent, you should talk to him. He's not here tonight, but talk to him next week. And then they decided, though, we have to start rating these things because people are going to start pushing the limit. And so for a while, there was a ratings of G, PG, and R. And we had this kind of thing where we were like, all right, you either are kids or like you're a little bit older kids, as long as your parents are around, you're probably okay. And then there's the adult content, like the stuff that they say a lot of swear words kind of thing or something like that, or at least that was the issue in the era. And then there started being some other movies that started coming out where people are like, we can push the limit because we can start to show certain things on screen. And they decided to make the PG-13 rating, where this is not quite for kids. It might be a little bit like more difficult to see or watch, a little bit too scary, but it's not quite R because it's not really pushing the limit too much. There's a movie that actually made this happen, and that would be Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Is anybody Indiana Jones fans in here? All right, good. I was worried. That one's okay, Colton. We'll talk later. But this movie kind of pushed the limit a little bit. I mean, there's a scene literally where a guy's heart gets pulled out of his chest, but there's not like blood and guts and stuff like that, so it's this weird in between. If you've seen Gremlins, that was also released the same year, and it was the same reason. And then there was an infamous movie that kind of popped out of nowhere that really caused people to get really nervous about what was going to be shown on screen. And this movie came out in the 70s. It was a horror movie, and people were like leaving the theaters because they were super offended, and people were terrified, and they were like throwing up and stuff. At least that's what the stories are. Does anybody know what this movie might be? The Exorcist. Good job, whoever said The Exorcist. It was The Exorcist. It's a Thanks, Dave. That's funny. The Exorcist came out, and it kind of created this whole thing called the Satanic Panic. And there were a lot of different like art forms, and that certain art forms, if you consume them or the content that they had, then they were obviously from the devil. And it started with this movie that kind of like really had some very like demonic overtones to it. And so it kind of started to spiral a little bit. So if you started listening to heavy metal, you were probably like corrupting your heart of the devil, right? Or if you watched a movie that had swear words in it, like you were probably like a lost cause at that point, you know? Or if you saw any semblance of nudity, it doesn't even have to be in a movie kind of thing, then all of a sudden, like you've lost all hope for salvation. And it starts to go to this point where if you watch fantasy and it's got magic, you're going to become a witch. Or if you watch a violent movie, you're going to become a violent person. And it caused this stir and this worry in people. And all of a sudden, they decided that instead of having this, like, anybody can go watch the movies, we have to create good, clean, Christian content for people to take in. And it became this era of a fear of film. And so back in the 90s, there wasn't so much of a fear of Satan or like that satanic panic kind of thing, but it was more of a political or cultural fear that started to happen. For a while, J.K. Rowling, people were worried like, oh, she's going to make my kids do witchcraft or something like that. And then it started to go, and because she views something a certain way with gender, all of a sudden it becomes, all right, we cannot watch Harry Potter anymore because she has this certain way that she views genders kind of thing. And it's something that even we wouldn't affirm at Redemption Chapel kind of thing of what she pushes back on, but we would say like that, oh, if she views that guys are guys and girls are girls, then she is a problem and we can't let our kids watch her. No, we would say that she's right, but people are nervous and scared because of what she's trying to say. And when we go into this, we watch these things, we decide, all right, I guess we have to have only safe media. We can't have media that's going to challenge us. We have to immediately assume that the creator's intent is a part of this movie or this story that we're reading, and then all of a sudden we have to say we can't take in those movies. We can only take in things that we know are true, and we know that are right, and that we know that are easy. And then all of a sudden, all these Christian movies start coming out. And I think we're missing out in those moments. We're in a moment where we're in a safety net era of movies, that we are constantly worried about what we're watching, that if you go to the comments section of Christianity Today's website and look at the review for Deadpool and Wolverine, you will see some wild things that people are saying about the people that go and watch this movie in the theaters. Things like, they're going to hell, there's no way that they're a Christian, things like that. And if you're not watching movies that are strictly Pixar or something from the Big Mouse, then you are like missing out completely on what it actually means to be a Christian. And I think that's the wrong way to view movies. I think we're missing out. And we've gotten to this point where people are just going to complain and they don't want to be challenged by what they're watching, but instead they're saying, I'm just going to take in what's easy. I think film is something that's unique. It's a unique art form. I talked about it's like only 100 years old, but I think it gives us a specific perspective into this. So at one point, if you read a book like Dune, you could visualize Arrakis and what Paul Atreides looks like. But now you could go to the theaters and you can like see Arrakis and you could see Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides. Or if you love Lord of the Rings, there was a point when Tolkien created this whole elvish culture, and you could really only understand it by reading, and you had to picture and visualize it. And there's a good aspect of that, but now we have this amazing moment where we can actually see into that world, or at least a picture of what it might look like. That it's creating something that we can visually, a medium that we can participate in, that we can see. Watching movies, it also gives you a window, a picture into the world that somebody else that you might not be aware of. So, like, I don't know what it's like to be an astronaut. But if I watch a movie like First Man with Ryan Gosling, talks all about the objective of getting to the moon, I can at least see a picture of what it looks like for him to wrestle with the cost of what comes with this. Or I don't know what it looks like to start a 5-star restaurant, but if I watch The Bear, I could see Carm learn what it looks like to actually start to make a restaurant successful into what it is. But I never would have known what that meant if I was just kind of like passively sitting by. I get a picture to understand these things. Honestly, though, movies can also just be beautiful. They can look amazing. I mean, Shawshank Redemption is one of the best redemption arcs in a movie ever, and it's a beautiful picture when he escapes prison. Into the Spider-Verse, is anybody Spider-Verse fans here? The movie's awesome. It is beautiful to look at. 1917 gives you a grotesque look at war and what it actually looks like, but again, it's appealing to the eye. Interstellar gives you a picture of space that you'd never get to experience kind of thing, because I'm not going to space anytime soon. And even like Avengers Endgame gets a shot like this. Like, I want to put this on my wall at home. That's awesome. It's so cool. Sydney lets me put whatever I want in the basement, in the man cave, all right? But movies can just be visually beautiful. And they can convey emotion through that, and they can also convey emotion as we see and watch people respond. There's a TV show called The Chosen that's very successful, especially in Christian communities. And the artists, the creators, have to take some liberties with how they talk about the narrative of Jesus and his disciples, because not everything is described in Scripture. But I think people are drawn to it because when they watch Jesus wrestle with the emotion of what it looks like to go on the cross, for him to be a human and to actually be in those moments, it conveys something new in us that we maybe necessarily wouldn't realize that he could have wrestled with at the time. And I'm not necessarily saying that show's very accurate, but I think it just gives us an emotional understanding and resonance with something. We need to understand something too, is that film isn't the problem, we are the problem, right? We are the problem. See, careful watching doesn't mean that you just watch Disney or Christian movies kind of thing. It doesn't mean you just watch all this safe stuff. I want to emphasize, though, it can mean that. I think that if you are in a position where you have to say, I can only watch these things, it's the only things that are good for me, then I commend you for that. Like, if you are actually sticking to your guns and only watching things that are going to be good for your heart, that's a good thing. Good for you. But if you're pointing at other people and saying, hey, you shouldn't be watching that because that's going to cause you to sin, I would encourage you to take a step back and wrestle. Do you actually know that person? Do you know their heart? Because just because you watch something doesn't necessarily mean you endorse it. If I watch a movie where there's murder that happens, that doesn't mean I'm okay with murder. It's just a part of the movie. It's a part of the story that's being told. If I watch a movie where there's a couple that has sex outside of marriage, it doesn't mean I'm a proponent for premarital sex. That's not what I'm trying to endorse. I'm taking in content and understanding and watching this story play out in front of me. It doesn't mean I'm saying that that's okay. It means I'm participating in this piece of art and this narrative that I get to watch. And the interesting thing about this, careful watching might mean that you only watch a handful of things. And that's okay. I want to make sure to emphasize, if you have to be careful with what you watch because you don't know how your heart is and you know where your sin lies, that's good. Good for you for like holding off on that. But if you're only watching a handful of things because it's easy or it's light or you're not willing to be challenged, I think that there is a moment, an emphasis where you can start watching difficult things. That you could say, I'm willing to be challenged in these moments. I'm willing to understand or grow in this moment, even if it's hard to watch, even if it's a difficult watch. It's something that's not easy to take in, but I can learn and I can grow from it in this moment. I think there's something to be said for somebody that wants to take in art that way. Now, we've been talking a lot, and so I want to give us a chance to actually interact with this. And so when you respond to movies and TV, I think there's two big avenues that I've noticed that were helpful for me to understand what it looks like to engage with this type of medium. And the first question I would ask is, what does this communicate? And that means when I'm watching it, I ask like a series of other questions. How can you see and understand what these characters are experiencing? What does this tell you about the world around you? What should our response be to what this communicates? And lastly, what biblical truths can I learn from this? So if we go and we try to watch some of these things, we try to understand some of these things, these are good questions to start to engage with content. So I'm going to show a movie clip, and then after the clip is done, I'm going to come back and I want you guys, just from the audience, I want you to respond to it with some of these questions, all right? I want to hear from you guys a little bit and really think, how are you emotionally responding to the situation, all right? So here's the clip.
This species of variformin's been extinct since the Cretaceous period. I mean, this thing isn't one of this thing. What?
It's a dinosaur.
You did it. You crazy son of a... You did it.
Look at this tear up the rule book on it. Cold-bloodedness, it doesn't apply. They're totally wrong. This is a warm-bodied creature.
This thing doesn't live in a swamp.
This thing's got, what, a 25, 27-foot neck? Brachiosaurus 30. With this place. How fast are they?
Well, we clocked the T-Rex to 32 miles an hour.
T-Rex?
Mm-hmm.
You said you've got a T-Rex?
Uh-huh.
Say again.
We have a T-Rex.
Oh.
Put your head between your knees.
Dr. Grant. My dear Dr. Sattler. Welcome to Jurassic Park.
They're moving in herds. They do move in herds. How'd you do this? I'll show you.
Who's seen that movie before? Who's seen Jurassic Park? Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad people are still watching this movie. I think that movie's awesome. So this might be kind of an unconventional pick, but I want to hear from you guys. Respond to some of these questions. I mean, just by show of hands, like, tell me, what did this communicate? How did it make you feel in those moments? What are you understanding from this clip? Just raise your hand if you got an idea. Yeah.
Kind of like what you're talking about before, like even with the Chosen, like seeing it, like they knew they were gonna go to
100%.
when they saw the long neck.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, the fact you get to see their emotion conveyed there, right? That's awesome. That's a great response. What are your thoughts? Brachiosaurus. Yeah, Caden.
God created dinosaurs that we know and that we've never seen them as in our time, but it's great that movies can portray that for us so we have an understanding.
Awesome. Yeah, this created idea that God created these things and that though we may have not seen them and maybe they may have not even looked like that, the fact that we can experience and be in awe of that kind of thing and recognize that, it's good. That's really good. What else? Yeah. Yeah, you're good, Ethan. Yeah.
When she was looking at the leaf and then he was looking at the dinosaur, it was kind of like sometimes, maybe we're looking at a leaf and missing like God's bigger picture, like, hey, there's a dinosaur over there, like experience that too.
Great poll. I love that. Yeah. The symbolism and the storytelling that's going on there. I love that. That's great. Yeah. Joe, yeah.
When he said it's a dinosaur,
Yeah.
I was so dumbfounded. This person studied dinosaurs his whole life.
Yeah.
He actually gets to see one.
The amazement, right? He can't believe it.
It's a dinosaur.
Yeah. It's all like how to be so in awe of what God's created, even though it's something we might be so familiar with, kind of thing, Even Ethan.
I would say like what the distance between like knowing about a thing and like knowing
Yeah.
about a thing.
That's great. That's a great poll too. Yeah, like what does it actually be to experience that thing? Yeah, that's awesome. Even the idea of like watching the guy in there say like, we're gonna make a fortune. Like how corrupt people can be to look at this beautiful thing and say, I'm gonna make money off that kind of thing. What a loss of that vision is. That's great. All right, so that is one way that I see, and I can kind of interact with movies, is understanding what does it communicate. The other way, though, that I want to make sure that we could talk about is talking about what does this symbolize? So this is like the step deeper into the pool of saying, all right, I want to actually learn to engage with this a little bit deeper. And to ask questions of like, who is the Christ figure in this? What do the characters represent? What does the dialogue lead me to understand? And the last question I always want to ask, what biblical truths can I learn from this? All right, so I have one more clip, and for the sake of time, I was going to have you guys talk at tables, but I think I might just have you guys respond again out loud. So watch this clip, and then we'll talk about it.
I killed those people. That's what I can be.
No, you can't. You're not.
I'm whatever God needs me to be. Call it in.
A hero. Not the hero we deserved, but the hero we needed. Nothing less than a knight. Shining.
I'll hunt you. You'll hunt me. You'll condemn me. Set the dogs on me. Because that's what needs to happen. Because sometimes truth isn't good enough. Sometimes people deserve more. Sometimes people deserve to have their faith rewarded.
Why is he running, Dad?
Because we have to chase him.
Okay, we're going in. Go, go, move.
He didn't do anything wrong.
Because he's the hero Gotham deserves. But not the one it needs right now. So we'll hunt him. Because he can take it. Because he's not a hero. He's a silent guardian. A watchful protector. A dark knight.
I feel like, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, come on, like, holy cow. I mean, I think I'm gonna go watch the movie after next tonight kind of thing. Like, that's awesome. Who in here's seen Dark Knight? All right, good. So from that clip, we see that Batman is, he's going and taking the hit for Harvey Dent, what he's done, Two-Face. So what does this symbolize? What do you guys see in this moment from this movie? What from this clip do you see? Maybe it's a Christ figure, maybe characters representing something. What is it that you pull from this? Christian Bale. That's why we keep Dave around, all right, for the dad jokes. Yeah, Christian Bale. That was good. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was good. Yeah. All right, what do you guys pull? Yeah.
Talked about like when they showed him, just like they said something like to reward people who are faithful or something like that.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, yeah, like he was loyal to Batman.
Sure.
Even when he was like really one of the only people.
Yeah, it's a good poll. Yeah, that's the understanding and representing that faith and what it looks like to trust in the person that's like going to protect the city. That's good. Yeah. What else? Other thoughts? Rose, yeah.
Someone taking the blame even when they didn't deserve it.
Awesome. It's one of my favorite things about The Dark Knight, the way that movie ends, is he didn't kill those people, Harvey Dent did, but he's willing to take the hit so that the people of Gotham can be protected. He's willing to be the one that's going to run from the police. He's the one that's going to say, I'm the one that's at fault, even though it's not me, for the sake of the people of Gotham. That he represents Jesus in that moment to say this is a Christ figure. And the analogy isn't perfect. I mean, we talked a little bit about it. Like, these are pictures that like help us to understand and recognize. I don't think Christopher Nolan was going for a Jesus story in this movie, but we can look at it and see what that actually represents for us. And so, in a minute, I'm going to bring Shannon back up here. We're going to wrap things up pretty soon. But when you start to think about movies, when you watch different movies, the next time you watch a movie like Joker, you don't watch it as something that's like a representation of violence, but you watch it as about somebody that has a mental health problem and nobody wants to help him, and how hard that is. Or if you watch a movie like Blade Runner, you talk about what it looks like to be a created human and what it looks like to actually understand the human heart. American Fiction was a movie that won an Oscar last year, and it's all about defining what the black experience actually is and what movies and TV have done to it. To talk a little bit about Dune, is Paul Atreides really a messiah, or is he somebody that's actually like a jacked up villain? That you watch Breaking Bad, and if you watch that show, it doesn't glorify Walter White, but it says he's a bad guy. He is not doing good things. If you watch, there's a movie called Little Fish. If you haven't watched it, I'd add that to your list. It's all about memories and what happens when you start to lose your memories and what you actually hold on to. That there's movies like Past Lives or other romance movies that talk about the complexity of human relationships, and you can compare it to the perfect relationship we have with our Father. The Iron Claw, which if you haven't seen that, I mean, that's like a gut punch, but it's all about brotherhood and loss and what that means. Or even movies like Coco. What it means to leave a legacy, right? Coco is one of my favorite Pixar movies because it's all about leaving a legacy. And I want us to learn, and the biggest takeaway I want for us is to watch movies and TV with a biblical filter. Don't let them influence you, but let you learn from it. But even a step further is when movies help you learn, they can help you love God better and love others better, all right? So I'm going to have Shannon come up, and we're going to kind of wrap things up here, and we're going to do a brief Q&A at the end because I went long. That's my fault. Sorry about that. But I want to be able to hit some of the more kind of practical points and ideas that we have coming off of this. So, all right. Thanks for coming back.
That was great.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right. So we have some practical thoughts and tips kind of thing.
Right.
These are things that hopefully you guys can take home with you to use when you guys are like starting to engage with art a little bit more. The first thing I want to talk about
Go
is
for
the
it.
big three.
Yep.
Is violence, language, and sex. I think that's like the biggest thing that pops up when we think about entertainment, but even specifically art and things like that. Mm-hmm. And maybe we don't address all of them specifically, but I think there's a good filter that we can kind of use when we think about these things. And I think one of the big things is, what causes you to sin? I mean, you have to know that for yourself and be honest with yourself. And so, I mean, jokes aside, I cut out the swear word from Jurassic Park clip kind of thing. One, because it's just appropriate. But two, like, I don't know who's in here who that would cause you to sin. It would cause your heart to lead down a path that would not be good, right? Violence, some people, I mean, we were talking a little bit about it. Violence, sometimes it means different things in different movies, but you shared a little bit that it sometimes doesn't always do good things for you.
Yeah, there are movies that Rick and I can't watch together, that he can handle that I just can't, because it'll give me bad dreams, or it'll just cause like an angst in me that I don't know what to do with. And so, but then there are other films where the violence, I can handle it because it's portraying the brokenness of our world. And so I just have to know myself and know what I can handle and what I can't.
Yep. And I think that's the good through line, because I think the biggest one that comes up with, especially young adults, but I mean, it should be for anybody, is with nudity and sex and the things that are allowed on TV and movies and things like that now. I think that is the area that probably most people struggle with, kind of thing. Especially Americans, kind of thing. And Christian Americans assume that whenever there's some sort of nudity or sex in a movie, that it's immediately bad. And I think at that point we are vilifying the content rather than recognizing the brokenness of our own hearts. And so I think it's important to say that most of the people in this room can't watch a film with nudity or explicit sex or something like that without it causing them to sin. I'm making an assumption there. I feel like it's a fair assumption, kind of thing. And so to say, like, I'm not going to watch this because it's not good for me is the right call. It's not worth it to compromise. And I think this is probably the biggest spot. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. So.
Yeah, I mean, if it arouses bad stuff in you, I think it's better to either watch, you know, there are some movies that you wait until they come out and you can watch them at home, so you can fast forward through.
Button's magical.
Yeah, and so you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater and miss the whole film. Some films you probably do need to miss the whole film, but yeah. So.
Yeah. Next thing, I don't know if you want to talk about it, Shannon.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is that you need to choose what art you're willing to take in, and I think First Thessalonians 5:21 and 22 gives us a good guide for this. So it says, "Test all things, hold fast what is good, abstain from every form of evil." And so if you approach all books, paintings, sculptures, films, all of it, with the lens of, I'm going to test all of it, I'm going to hold fast to what is good, and I'm going to abstain from any kind of evil, I think that can give you a good guideline. And it might look slightly different for each of us, but I think that the big principles are there. And so we can ask the questions, is this good for me? What senses does it evoke in me? Does it do good stuff in me? Or does it cause me to want to move towards sin? That's asking that. That's the testing all things part of that verse. Does it celebrate evil? One of the standards that we had for our kids and what books we would read and what we wouldn't, what video games we would allow them to play, all that kind of stuff is the game a celebration of evil? Does it require me to put myself in an evil person's shoes and do evil things and kind of celebrate that? Or does it do good stuff in me? And then, can I see threads of God's bigger story through it? Is there enough in it that it gives me a picture of God's bigger story? And then lastly, what longings and desires does it kind of draw out for me?
That's really good.
Yeah.
Like, those are all good things to have, like, in your back pocket when you're learning to engage with different pieces of content.
I agree.
Yeah. This next one is something you wrote down, and I think is probably one of the most helpful things, because it's not talked about enough. I want to let you share a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I think there are some obstacles that come when we think about engaging well with art and taking in good art. And I think there are probably three big things. One is that we're busy. And so our days move fast. we can move through a whole week and we can really fail to pay attention to all of the artistic beauty that is around us, whether that's whatever kind of mode that art is coming to us, even the creation itself that God made. We're busy and we move fast, and when we have a break, we just scroll Instagram reels without really thinking about them and engaging with them. Because I think there can be beauty in short form film as well. Reels can do good stuff in us.
Yeah, Caleb makes some really good stuff. Your son makes some really good stuff that he puts out there. It's very thought-provoking.
Yeah. And so it's not all bad, but we have to know what we're doing with it. And then there's the idea of distraction. I think sometimes we're just really distracted. I think we're not trained as a culture anymore to linger and reflect and sit before art. We just take it in.
It's this thing. It's this thing's fault.
Yeah, right.
I hate this thing when I'm watching movies. I have a basket in my basement when I go to watch movies that I put my phone in so that I don't look at my phone. 'Cause I know I'm tempted to do it. So,
Yeah, as much as I love to read, I find myself at times, I'll come home at the end of the day, and I have desires. I have more books than I know what to do with. I have a desire to read them. And I'm just talking about fiction even. I'm not even talking about like things I want to learn from, but and I'll just distract it on my phone instead. And then I get to the end of that half hour and I think, what did I just do? Like I could have been reading something good, and I just was choosing distraction. And then the last thing I think is laziness, that it's easier to just be passive. It's easier to just kind of numb out. And like I said earlier when I talked about entertainment, it's not that there's never a space for numbing out. Like sometimes that is what I need, is to just park my brain for a little bit, but it should just be for a little bit.
Right.
And so the laziness kind of, I think, gets in the way sometimes of us engaging well with art.
Yep, I totally agree. The last thing I want to do, since we're going over time, there's one more point I want to make sure to get across.
Yeah.
Art is never worth compromising your relationship with God. Art is just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you make excuses to say, I'll be fine if I watch that thing, knowing it's going to cause you to sin, or, oh, that book, it's got some moments in it, but it's not going to cause my mind to do anything, you know? I know this won't leave me with feelings of despair, or if it does, I'll be okay. This thing is like completely unglorifying to God. I'm fine though if I take it in. That our excuses will cause us to drift further and further from God, and we have to be aware of our own hearts, and sometimes even just the intent of the world kind of thing, of what that looks like, of worldly things, of things that are not of God. I want this workshop to be helpful because we all consume art in different ways, but I want it to be helpful in the sense that we see that it can glorify God, but it doesn't always glorify God. And if you leave here and say, I can watch whatever I want because I have a biblical filter, you are thinking really highly of yourself kind of thing, because I can't do that. I don't think Shannon can do that. Nobody can do that. And you just have to be wary of what you are taking in. So, yeah. Any thoughts before we jump in Q&A?
No, I think that covers it well.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to do a little bit of Q&A. So Rose is going to come up here. We have a QR code up here. So as normal, if you guys want to scan that QR code, that's all right, Ellie. That's okay. If you guys want to scan that QR code, and if you want to be able to ask some questions, Rose is going to fill some of these out. But yeah, thanks for coming up here, Rose.
Of course. Yeah, like Alex said, just put in your questions into just scan the QR code. But while we're waiting, I wanted to ask you guys, what's some art that you guys like? I ask this to Ethan a lot, but like, do you have any like dream art that you've wanted to make, or like art that like you're craving? Does that make sense?
Art to make or to view? What do you mean?
To make. So like,
To make.
is there like you mentioned literature and you mentioned film? Like, is there a film like that you've dreamed about making, or is there like a book or maybe a blog post or something that you've craved to make?
Yeah, there's a children's book idea that's been brewing around in my head for a while, but I haven't done anything with it.
One day.
So
One
I
day.
know. Yeah.
Yep. There's a movie concept that I've had that I really wanted to put work into, but it takes a lot of work to make movies and a lot of money that I don't have. So, and it's not like it's impossible, but I have a movie specifically, it's like a science fiction type thing. Even a short film, I would love to make it someday. I think it'd be awesome. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say too, you guys, if there's like a question that you like, you guys could like bump it up. So maybe we can get to it during the time, but a lot of the questions are like specifically written to some of you guys. So for Shannon, this first question is, what are some of the emotions that are evoked in you when you read the good food pieces of literature?
It's funny, I was talking to Alex and Rose that sometimes just a sentence that is really well written will evoke like just either joy or sadness. I remember in 9th grade reading The Outsiders. I don't know if that's still a book that people have to read in high school, but I read it in 9th grade and just weeping at the concepts of when he says everything is gold, like just, yeah. And so for me, a good piece of literature can evoke a broad range of emotions and should, because if it's reflective of what real life is like, life is a broad range of emotions. And so, but sometimes even the weeping is a good kind of weeping because it's a sense of like the weightiness of life. So, yeah.
there's a 19-year-old Tom Cruise in that movie.
Yeah.
He
Right.
looks like a little baby in that movie.
Right.
That's funny, like we still had to read that in school, or at least I did. So
Yeah.
That's cool.
Right.
Alex, this one I thought it was phrased similarly for you, but it says, has there ever been a movie or TV show that surprised you when it came to the emotions and senses it evoked in you?
Yeah, that's good. The most recent one for me, I talked about it briefly, is The Bear. It's a TV show you can watch it on Hulu, but it's all about this guy who leaves a 5-star restaurant job, and he's an excellent chef, to go work at his family sandwich shop. And to watch it and to watch him wrestle with feelings of anxiety and frustration and fear, but also excitement and joy, and how these things are trying to balance out of, he wants to live up to this expectation. And I remember there's one episode in particular, I think it's episode 7 of season 2. I cried viscerally. It was 12:30 in the morning, sitting in bed. I was on the couch crying because I felt very confirmed with my some of my recent struggles with anxiety, and getting to understand that and to feel that and watch somebody else that I understand that, I get what he's feeling right now, and not feel like a crazy person, It was a very opening moment for me. So yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
This one is a little more broad, but it says, as an artist, how can you create art that is glorifying to him without it being explicitly Christian? Because I liked that. I thought it touched on what you said with we shouldn't separate. There should be Christian art and there shouldn't be secular art too.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien used to meet. They formed a group called the Inklings that they would evaluate each other's stories. And they talked a lot about writing with your Christianity latent. That was the term that they used. That your biblical worldview is kind of just laying back there, and it's influencing you, but that doesn't mean every time you paint it has to be a picture of Jesus. It's kind of so you might paint something to create an emotion that pops. I think about some of Van Gogh's work. Starry Night is a really common one, so you've probably all seen that one. I don't know where Van Gogh was with the Lord, but that can create a worshipful experience to look at that painting and be struck by his impression of what the night sky looks like. You know what I mean? And so he doesn't even have to say anything about God in that, but it can influence him I don't know where he was with the Lord, but yeah.
That's good. Yeah, my biggest thing is I think the Christian medium, at least recently, has been you create safely, rather than like portraying the crap, you know. And like I think of there's some Christian movies that like once you find Jesus, life gets really easy and like life's gonna go great for you and everything. And if you've been a Christian for more than a few months, you know that that's not always true, you know.
Right.
And so to realize and recognize like there are hard things to go through. Like people, sometimes the best way to convey an emotion is to use a swear word. You know, sometimes the best way to paint a picture is to give a really like a graphic image that portrays like that is something hard. How can I respond to that, and how can I look to God in those moments? You know, I don't think it has to be this clean, tidy thing, because I don't think the Bible operates that way. But I also think that God doesn't always operate that way too. In His perfection and His truthfulness, I think sometimes it's the hardest moments when we see Him. So,
yeah, there can be a lot of beauty in those hard moments. So, so I think you just write or you paint or you create with your Christianity, just kind of in the background influencing how you view the world, but you might never actually, like, I mean, Tolkien is one of the most famous fantasy authors ever, and we know as we look at his work that the ring is all about sin, but he never says that. It's just kind of like this massive struggle that we watch the Fellowship go through to get rid of the ring, and it's this beautiful thing, but it's not like Tolkien's like, hey, this is an allegory about Jesus. Like, he doesn't do that. Even Lewis is a little more allegorical, but he doesn't even, you know, that you could be a non-Christian and read about Aslan and have no idea that that's a Christ figure.
Yeah, dang, that's good. I said we gotta finish watching the Two Towers this week. We started it, we never finished it. That made me want to.
That was really good. This one's the most upvoted question, and I know we've talked about it before, so I'm interested to hear what you're going to say. But it says, what perspective do you have on movies like The Exorcist that involve demonic things? So I guess also, like, how would you advise the young adults to, like, when they're viewing that, what their perspective on it?
Yeah. So I'll start off the bat. I love scary movies. I love watching horror movies. I think there's like a thrill to it that's like being on a roller coaster kind of thing. Like, even if it's just a jump scare, it always gets me kind of thing, and I love it. But that being said, when it comes to things like that, that's when things get a little bit more real. And you have to ask yourself, with some of those questions that Shannon put up, what does this evoke in you? Does it celebrate evil? Does evil win in the end? Does it say that evil is a good thing, or is it portraying evil as the bad guy and we're fighting against that? The Exorcist is a good example. I've seen it 2 or 3 times. I remember the first time I watched it with my dad, and he told me the stories of like being in the theater and like having to leave because his dad was like, "This is too much. Like, we gotta go to church tomorrow morning." You know?
Right.
But in the end of that movie, the priest that's trying to exorcise this demon out of this little girl, he says, "There's only one way for me to defeat this. There's no other way. It's that I'm going to take this demon and I'm going to jump out of the window so that I die and the demon does too." And he takes on the demon, jumps out, dies, and the demon is gone. Or at least for that movie. You can watch the sequels if you want. But effectively, that's the idea, is that somebody was willing to sacrifice himself so that somebody else could be saved. So, I mean, it's a good, the narrative there, the picture is good. Sorry if I spoiled it. That movie's like 50, it's like 50 years old now.
Right.
Now, that being said, again, those movies, if they evoke something in you of despair, of darkness, of sadness, don't watch it. It's not worth it. But there's ways to do it. I have a book back there. I meant to bring it up with me. It's all about a Christian perspective on horror movies, and it helps you kind of see some of those narrative through lines. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but yeah.
No, I think that's great. You just have to know what it does in you.
Yeah,
you know?
Ellie's holding it up right there. So
yeah.
If you want to look at it, it'll be back there. So yeah.
She's modeling it back there.
Yeah, thanks, Ellie.
Yeah.
No, that's good. We've talked about it too, like there's a podcast. There's a lot of
Christianity
resources.
Today did a podcast all about it. That's right. I wish I could remember what it was called.
Be Afraid.
Be Afraid. That's what it's called. There we go.
This next question, it's about, I'm interested to see how you guys talk about it, because in the Bible, when I think of art very vividly, I think of music and how they talk about worship in that way. So it says, how do you guys find yourselves enjoying art as far as the music side of it in everyday life?
You can go first. I'm not a musician here. So.
Right, yeah.
We need
I mean,
Barry Bourbon.
I think it's interesting that music is a big part of movies. Like when they're building to a moment, the music is sometimes the music is what will grab my heart, like because it's building towards something. Or so I think movie soundtracks are pretty impressive, actually, part of the art. But for me, music depends on my mood. Like it ministers to me in different ways, and it doesn't have to be Christian music specifically, but I love music that tells a story, and so those are my favorite musicians, are the ones that are more, so folk music is more my vibe because I like that storytelling part of it. But I realize that's not going to be everybody's vibe, and I mean, music, a lot of times it can calm me, like depending on what the vibe is I'm trying to create at home. I have a soundtrack called Welcome Home that is just, or not a soundtrack, a playlist called Welcome Home that is just intended to be peaceful and refreshing in our home. And so, and I will put it on in the morning, or you know what I mean? So it just depends, for me, the emotion depends on what I want to create, you know?
That's good.
But I think music is powerful in that way. Yeah, and so, I don't know if that answers the question, but.
No, you did it perfectly.
Oh, good.
Yeah. This movie soundtrack one, I was going to say, I don't think that Jurassic Park clip works as well without the music. Like when you first see the dinosaur and it like swells all together. Like it makes you feel like a sense of awe and excitement. And so I think that's a very great point, and I would echo everything else that Shannon said. I'm not a musician by any means, but I think that there is a worshipful attitude when you raise your voices to the Lord, even in that, but in other areas as well. So, yeah.
No, that was good. This is the next most upvoted question. It says, are there any things that Christians as a whole shouldn't indulge in when it comes to art, or would you say all of it is conviction-based?
That's a really good question.
They slayed whoever did that.
I mean, I think because we talked about this a little bit, one of the places we drew a line was pornography.
Yeah.
It's an art form in a way, but I don't think it's ever going to do something good, you know?
Yep.
Like
somebody's going to say that that's art, but to say that that's art and that is good for you is not true at all. Like,
yeah,
I agree, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, effectively, some of that is discerning. I would hope that as a Christian community, though, that is an easy discernment kind of thing. You know, it portrays and glorifies something that is not good for us, and that's not glorifying to God by any means. And in many ways is disgusting and gross and offensive, and it does nothing good. And there's things that border that, like you're talking like 50 Shades of Grey, stuff like that, like smut, like that garbage writing that like happens that is like you were talking about, that is just there to serve one purpose and one purpose only. You know?
Right.
So I think there are things that are no good. I guess in some way it's a discernment thing, but I think there are things that you can unanimously say this isn't good. And that's a great example. So
Yeah, I think that's, you know, for instance, I really like the show Outlander, but there were whole episodes that we just had to skip because it just wasn't. It was bordering on pornography. You know what I mean? And so they left off the storytelling, and there was one of them in specific I'm thinking of. It had a point. It wasn't only just gratuitous, but the line was so blurred that it was like, what is the purpose for us to watch this? There's nothing good that's going to come out of us viewing this.
Yep.
And so,
what is the purpose? That's really good.
Yeah. And so I think there probably are some times when you just have to say, no, there's nothing good that a Christian is going to gain from this.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. There's the thunder. This question kind of goes back to what we were talking about with horror movies, but it says movies that mock Christ, are they even worth watching? And they gave a few examples of like The Nun and Ouija.
Movies are not good, first of all, but you have thoughts here for this?
Characters that mock Christ. I've wrestled with this with comedians at times where I'm like, I don't know if I want to sit here and listen to him make fun of my Lord. I think it depends on the context.
Yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that is the biggest thing for me is like, is the point of this, is the purpose of this to point at God and like mock him and say he's nothing and compare him to poor things. And we don't need to defend God. He will do it himself. But that being said, do I want to sit through that? I think purpose and context is huge. I mean, for lack of a better example, or for most relevant example, like with Deadpool and Wolverine, there's a scene in there where Deadpool calls himself Jesus. I don't think it's that big a deal because Deadpool's not a Christian, so I don't think they're trying to like make this big Christian joke. Then again, you might sit through that and say, I find that offensive against my God. I don't want to sit through that, and that's okay. I think the fact that you can be aware of that and know that is okay. But if you could sit through it and say, the context of this is not to degrade God, it's not to sit there and make a mockery of who God is kind of thing, I think then in those moments you can say, all right, I don't think this was the purpose of it kind of thing. And if you're watching Ouija and The Nun, those are bad movies. Those movies suck. So
there's no artistic value.
Yeah, it's just me though, maybe. So I'll Letterboxd. So.
Right. Well, I think about some movies or books like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, where it's using a religious figure. He's the evil guy, like he's the hated character. I think in that case, they're not making fun of God. They're making fun of people that are abusing. They're not making fun of, but they're like villainizing people that are abusing their position and power. And I think that is a good thing to shed a light on. And so, of course, a secular artist isn't always going to know where those lines blur, but I think that's where you can take good things from it depending on what the context is.
Yeah.
And so
we watched that movie in school when I was at Cedarville to talk about the history of the church and talk about what the church was doing at the time because it's a good portrayal of it.
It was gross.
Yeah,
it was gross, and we can call it gross.
Yep.
And so I'm not afraid of books that draw that out and say, yeah, the church was kind of screwed up for a little while.
Yep, big time.
This next question is similar to how we talked about like with music, but it's more about video games. So it just says, to touch more on the video game side of art, what are y'all's general thoughts about them? Y'all.
I would put them more in the entertainment category than in the art category. I think there is some art to them, but I'd put them more in that entertainment category. Although I don't even know that that's fair because there are some that have a pretty cool story arc. So I think it's another one of those things where it just depends, where you have to say, like, is the character you're portraying evil? And is it glorifying evil? Like you'd have to sell me on Grand Theft Auto being worth your time. But then I think about a game like Zelda where you're like, it's kind of a quest and it's kind of cool. And so I think it would depend. I don't know. Like, I didn't grow up, like when I was a kid, Nintendo was just coming out with the games that you could pong back and forth. So it wasn't part of my world, but it was part of my kids' world. And so we had to help our kids think that through. I think it depends how much time you're giving it, what it's doing in you. I think there can be some good camaraderie that happens with it. So I don't know. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I love video games. I play video games every week. It's just one of my hobbies, and it's something that, and I just wrote a blog post all about how I can help. This helps me glorify God in certain ways. We were just talking about The Last of Us is this narrative arc that has watched me wrestle with like moral conundrums. They made a TV show out about it because it's such a good narrative kind of thing, and to watch people like wrestle with violence and what the weight of violence, and you have to take these actions, like, are the actions you're taking actually worth it? Like, I can't believe a video game is making me ask these questions, and so it can be.
Yeah.
But that being said, what is it conveying you? What is it evoking you? Are you angry by the end of the time you're playing video games, or are you considering and thinking through and having it be thought-provoking? I think it can be. I think it's such a new art form, if you want to call it that, that it's, people are still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good distinguisher.
So this will be our last question, but I thought it kind of related to what you guys talked about at the end. But it just to like leave them with something that they could like just practically try to incorporate in their life. It says, how do you realistically incorporate art into your daily life? I know you mentioned like the distractions we face, like, but what are some things like that we could intake good art that's just not entertainment?
I think sometimes it's choosing what's in your feed, like as far as art. Like I follow some accounts that I think are beautiful and good, and there's one account I love on Instagram that it's this photographer artist guy, and he creates these little acorn people, and he puts them outside in his yard and has them. Like there's one, last week there was a picture of a chipmunk running up to get a berry out of the hand of the little acorn guy he created. And for me, that just creates something beautiful and sweet and reminds me of stories about critters that are kind of cool. And so you can, even through something like Instagram, have what pops up in your feed be beautiful and good and stir good things in you. But I'm also working on being a little bit more intentional to read poetry and to, like I want to make a regular habit of going to the Cleveland Art Museum as like, not every day, I don't have time to do that, but could I go once a quarter or twice a year to just train my brain to slow down and be reflective and sit in front of good art. And so those are some things I'm doing to kind of make those choices. It doesn't mean that I'm always just stewing on artistic endeavors, but those are some things I'm trying to do to kind of fan the flames on this part of my life.
Yeah. I always just try to ask, I mean, I think it's probably true of most of us in the room. We all watch movies, TV, or something like that. It's just a big part of my life. I try to leave every episode or every movie with at least one thing that I can take away from it. Sometimes it's more, but like to even comes with like sitcoms. Like why do I have tears in my eyes when Jim proposes to Pam at the gas station kind of thing? Like,
right.
Why do I feel this way? You know, or like when Sydney and I finished The Last of Us, I rewatched it with her, and we sat and talked a little bit about like the morality of the decisions that were made at the end of that show, and like the weightiness of like what would we do in that situation? What can we learn from this? It takes 5 minutes for you to sit and think about that, you know, and so to have that opportunity to actually reflect on it is good. And to ask that question.
Yeah.